What's up guys, Noah from Stage 3 Motorsports here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to install the RCI engine skid, transmission skid, and transfer case skid plate on your Toyota Tacoma. This skid plate package is going to work on all trucks base model up to TRD Pro, but obviously on the higher level trucks you may already have some factory skids installed, so depending on what you bought you can kind of skip through this intro if you only need the transmission or the transfer case or the engine skid, but we're going to show you how to do it all front to back. So before we throw on our RCI skid plate here, we're going to need to take off some factory equipment, and depending on what package you have on your vehicle, you may have some different skids underneath. Basically, all you're going to need to really focus on is just getting all the hardware out of it and saving it. So whether or not you have the full TRD package or just a regular front engine skid, whatever that may be, save the hardware that comes with it because you may need it. So we're going to use a 12mm socket, and you can throw this on an impact or a ratchet and unbolt these and it should just drop right down. After you've removed your skid plates from underneath, you're going to need to come through and grab a 17mm socket, and we're going to take off these stamped steel brackets that are attaching to the actual frame mounts on the bottom. And so once those are clear, we can get a nice snug fit for the RCI. Now you can see that we've got everything cleared out of the way, and our truck didn't have a back skid here for the engine, but if yours did, obviously that needs to be removed. So with all that clear, we're going to grab the RCI skid and I'm going to put it on top of this pole jack that I set up to help lift it into place, and that's going to support it so I can line up all the bolts underneath. Now, if you're doing this on the ground, which most of you probably are, it's actually a little bit easier because you can hold the plate up with your knees or get a floor jack and just crank it up to get it into place. So definitely give that a shot. I don't recommend doing it on a lift. We just wanted to make it easier for you guys to see. Now we've got the skid plate lined up, we're going to reuse that factory hardware that we used the 17mm socket for to mount the front 4 screws here, and then we're going to use the new hardware that came with it for the back 2, where we didn't have anything originally in place, to get that all spaced up. So in the back here, we're going to grab that hardware packet that I mentioned, and you're going to take this bolt with a washer and the black spacer, and you're going to slide the spacer in between the skid and this little cross member, and the bolt's going to come up from the bottom, and it'll just thread into these holes that are already pre-drilled on the truck. Now you can start it by hand here, but we're going to do it on both sides, and we're actually going to leave this loose because we need some gap to go ahead and get the transmission skid to slide in underneath this. For the transmission skid, we're going to need to remove these bars that are basically here to protect the cats. Now, if your truck's a little bit earlier in this generation, you may not have these bars, in which case you can just keep moving on to the next step. But for pretty much anything 16 and newer, you're going to have these. So grab that 12mm socket, and we're going to loosen all these up, and we should be able to just drop the bars off. I went ahead and brought our pole jack back in with a little rag on top, so that's going to help support this middle transmission plate. Now when we bring it up, we're going to slide it in underneath the engine skid, but we're going to want to have those little black spacers on top of it so that way they're still pushing up against the cross member, and that'll give us a nice flush fitment across this center section. Perfect. With the transmission skid in place, we're going to go tighten up these 13mm bolts again to get this front part locked in, and then we can use the RCI hardware to attach the back. We're going to take our carriage bolt and slide it up through the bottom of the skid here at the back, and that should slot right into place with that square cut hole. Then you're going to have a couple of these half circle sort of washers. So we're going to take one, slide it over the top, and you'll see that it's cut so that it doesn't get in the way of the mount for the cross member there. Then we'll take our regular flat washer, set it on top of that. And all we need from there is going to be the lock washer and the nut. So all those will drop into place. And we'll just get this tightened down a little bit. Now we are going to want to leave this a little bit loose on both sides, so when we lower the jack down, we're going to have a bit of a gap, and that's going to give us room to slide in our transfer case skid underneath, and then we should have it all flush all the way back. Okay. For the transfer case skid, we're going to need to attach another brace that goes across here that gives it a place to mount. So in order to do that, you're going to need to grab that 12mm socket, and we're going to undo this bolt that's holding on the bracket for the brake lines. And then we're also going to remove the bolts that are holding these little plastic inserts in the frame, and there's just one on each side. So let's get all that clear, and then we can get our new mount braced up. Now over here on the passenger side of the truck, you can see that there's actually a hole that's kind of exposed, and in order to get to this, you're gonna have to peel back these little tabs that are just covering them. And so those are pre-drilled, and with the plastic out of the way, you can get behind it, which is gonna be handy on this side because you're gonna need to put a nylock nut back here to support that mount, whereas on the other side, there's already a nut welded in. Now we're going to use one of the bolts and washers provided from RCI to slot into this hole where the brake bracket is. And then we'll use a 13mm socket to tighten it down. Now on the passenger side of the vehicle, we're going to take the other bolt and washer. We're going to run it through and just get it in that top hole. Then we're going to take a washer and the nylock nut for the back side and get these threaded on. So I've got our transfer case skid all in position, and what I'm gonna do is run the 3 little carriage bolts through the bottom here on this side and still leave the section loose that I slotted into the transmission, just to make sure that I can get it all straight on the back, and then once these are good, we can tighten up the transmission bolts and it should all lock together. right. So I used the 17mm socket to tighten down that nut and washer on the top of all these carriage bolts. This is all lined up perfect, so now we can come back to the bolts that are holding the transmission and the front of this mount. And what we're going to do is take a 14mm socket and use that on the nut for the top here so we can tighten that up, and then this should be good to go. So guys, that's a wrap on this RCI skid plate install. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the video, probably wouldn't recommend trying to do it on a lift just because it is hard to hoist all this stuff up in the air and hold it above you. But if you do it on the ground with a floor jack, it's actually not too difficult. And if you're interested in picking up one of these RCI skid plates or the full kit for your Toyota Tacoma, head down in the description below, click those links. It's going to shoot you over to our website, and I'll see you guys next time.